Good morning, everyone. All right, good morning, everyone. There we go. My name is John Falchicchio. I am Chief of Staff to Mayor Muriel Bowser, and I also am wearing a hat as the Interim Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. I'm here today to welcome you on behalf of Mayor Bowser and Urban Land Institute to the panel about the Rock Creek West Planning District. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why we are here. So as you know, one of the hallmarks of the Bowser administration is the preservation and creation of affordable housing. And recently the mayor set a new goal of creating 36,000 new homes in the District of Columbia by 2025. So 36,000 new homes in the District of Columbia by 2025, 12,000 of which need to be affordable. And so as we scan DC, the question is, where do you put them, right? And so of those 36,000 units, I said that 12,000 need to be affordable to low income, but we also want to preserve an additional 6,000 units of affordable housing. So the task is large. And that's why we know that while we have many of the answers, we don't have all of them. Just a brief story, the mayor recently visited Israel, and she sat down with the mayor of Tel Aviv while she was there. The mayor of Tel Aviv is now in his 5th term as mayor. And so when you are a 5th-term mayor, I imagine you get right down to it, right? There's lofty goals, but then you have to have a way to march to achieve those goals. And so housing affordability is actually an issue in Tel Aviv as well. And so the mayors were talking about, what do you do to solve that problem? And so the mayor of Tel Aviv asked Mayor Bowser, what are you doing? And the mayor said, I'm setting a goal of creating 36,000 new units by 2025. And he said, okay, all right, will that work? And she said, well, it's one of the things we do is set goals. And then he said, but how will you get there? How will you make it so that housing is more affordable? And the mayor said, well, we've also invested $100 million in our Housing Production Trust Fund. And the mayor, being a 5th-term mayor, cut right to it and said, well, is that enough? And the mayor said, no, that's one of the tools. And he said, so what else? And she said, well, we've created a preservation fund. And that preservation fund leverages private dollars in order for us to preserve more affordable housing. We'll actually celebrate our over 1,000 units of preserved housing out of that fund today. So Mayor Bowser will do that today. We actually will also celebrate that 20 of those units that we've preserved are right here in Ward 3 near Cathedral Heights. And so the mayor said, okay, well, that's a good tool, but will that be enough? And the mayor said, there's more that we're going to do. And the mayor said, well, what are you going to do? The mayor of Tel Aviv, what are you going to do? And she said, I'm going to do everything that we can do in order to create more affordable housing. And so while we might not have all the answers, we have to go through exercises where we constantly ask ourselves, what more can we be doing? It didn't take the mayor of Tel Aviv to tell us that. Mayor Bowser knew that, and that's why we're here today. And so we're excited to have this panel here. The panel, while they looked very polished right now, we know that they had missed flights to overcome, missed connections. They had our rain on Monday morning, in which they were out doing a tour of Rock Creek West. And then they were sequestered in a hotel to write a report in a very short amount of time. So they've overcome a lot to be here. So let's thank them real quick before we get started. And then how many folks here live in DC or the DC region? Good, we got a great turnout. Okay, this is the audience participation portion of my remarks. So how many folks, and I want you to keep your hands up, okay? I want you to keep your hands up. How many folks were born in the District of Columbia or the region? Okay, keep your hands up, okay. Now I'm gonna do this without trying to age anyone, but how many people have been here for more than 30 years? Now keep your hands up if you've been here, either born here or more than 30 years. All right, more than 20 years? I'm gonna keep my hand up now. More than 10, more than 5, and less than 5. Okay, keep your hands up, keep your hands up. All right, now when it comes to creating affordable housing, keep your hand up if you have all the answers for how to solve the problem. If you did, I was going to excuse the panel and invite you up. But since nobody did, I want to bring up the leader of the panel chair, Philip Payne. Philip has worked for nearly 30 years to produce and maintain multi-family rental housing that is affordable to the workforce. Important term, workforce. He is, let's see, here we go.
Charlotte, North Carolina.
Charlotte, North Carolina. And he's currently a principal at Ginkgo Residential, which provides workforce housing in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. He's founding chairman of Urban Land Institute's Responsible Property Investment Council. And we're so fortunate to have him at the helm of this advisory panel. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Philip Payne.
Thank you for the generous introduction. Good morning, everybody. And as it was just said, my name is Philip Payne, and I've had the distinct privilege and honor of being the chair of this ULI panel. I first want to start off with some thank yous. I also want to learn how to use the clicker. First, I want to thank all the people who've made this panel possible, especially our sponsors. From the city, I want to thank Mayor Bowser and all the members of the city staff who provided information and support to the panel and who answered literally hundreds of questions with patience and courtesy, even when those questions were somewhat inane. Second, I want to thank all the people who made themselves available for our interview sessions. Without them, we would not have been able to get a true understanding of the diversity of opinions in the community on this issue. And finally, I would like, then I want to thank the ULI staff who supported the panel with research, facts, guidance, and most importantly, kept us fed. And finally, on behalf of the city, ULI, and myself, I want to thank the panelists for their work and dedication on this panel. A little background on ULI. Since 1936, the Urban Land Institute, or more commonly called ULI, is a nonprofit organization with more than 45,000 members worldwide. Its membership includes the entire spectrum of responsible use of land. I'm lost. The spectrum of land use in development disciplines. The Institute's mission is to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide. Of particular interest to this panel is ULI's longstanding commitment to understanding the issues surrounding housing. In fact, housing, and specifically the provision of affordable housing, is included in the Institute's Articles of Incorporation and is currently the Institute's top priority. In short, ULI believes that housing is a fundamental underpinning of a healthy, thriving community. A key component of the Institute's fulfillment of this mission is its advisory services panel program. Since 1947, this program has assembled over 700 ULI member teams to help communities with land use, planning, and development concerns. Each panel is comprised of highly qualified professionals who have volunteered their time to serve on the panel. Each panelist has been chosen for their knowledge of the topic of the panel's engagement and to create a diversity of disciplines and experience. All panelists have been screened for conflicts of interest in order to ensure their objectivity. As chairman of the panel, I would like to note that this panel is one of the best panels with which I've had the opportunity to serve. Rather than read a list of the names of the panelists and staff, I'm going to ask each member of the panel to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Heather Worthington. I'm the Director of Long Range Planning for the City of Minneapolis. And Minneapolis is a city of about 428,000, located in the Twin Cities region, which is about 3 million.
My name is Brad Lieben. I'm an architect from San Francisco. I work for a firm called David Baker Architects, and we specialize in multifamily housing with a particular focus in affordable housing.
Good morning. My name is Chris Riley. I'm from Austin, Texas, where I've been involved in urban planning efforts for many years. From 2009 to 2015, I served on the Austin City Council.
Hi, good morning. I'm Brian Nagendra. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and previously lived in the district for about 10 years, starting in 2003. Previously, I'm the principal for Abacus Impact. I previously worked at Living Cities, City First Enterprises, and the Brookings Institution.
My name's Keith Harris. I'm the managing principal of CKG Advisors. I've been in the real estate industry and specifically the multifamily industry and the acquisition and repositioning of affordable assets for the last 25, 30 years. And I'm from Oak Park, Illinois.
Hi, my name's David Greensfelder. I'm managing principal of Greensfelder Real Estate Strategy. We work across the country on problems of urban economics, planning, and strategy.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Tomey. I'm the executive director of the Terwilliger Center for Housing at the Urban Land Institute here in Washington. I live across the river in Arlington, Virginia. And before coming to the Urban Land Institute, I spent about 20 years working in housing policy and government relations with a dozen years at leading that program at Habitat for Humanity International.
Okay, that's the panel. And just to give you a little bit of background beyond what John just said, my name is Philip Payne. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina. For the last 30 years, I've spent basically 100% of my time working on workforce housing, primarily through the rehabilitation of deeply distressed housing in order to provide housing that's affordable to the workforce. More recently, my wife and I and two associates have founded a group called the Lotus Campaign, of which the purpose of which is to try and increase the availability for people who have experienced homelessness by engaging the private real estate and investment communities. Okay. In preparation for today's presentation and our final report, the panelists have read and reviewed hundreds of pages of background material, including materials provided by the city staff. I want you to know that the information provided by the city staff was excellent. Its content, organization, clarity, and especially its presenting of the disparate views of various segments of the community provided an excellent foundation for the understanding of the issues. I'm one slide too far here. Surrounding the issues and the issue of the consideration by this panel. Over the past week, the panel has toured Rock Creek West and the surrounding areas, interviewed in excess of 80 people representing the full range of views and opinions surrounding the issue, and has spent days, often in late until the night, discussing and sometimes debating the issues and best policy and practices to recommend to the community. Unless you have served on a ULI panel, it is hard to comprehend the arduous nature of this work and the commitment and dedication of the people willing to volunteer and take a week out of their professional life to serve on the panel. John sort of stole some of my thing, which was to give you a background on why we're here, but I'll just sort of repeat a few things. As you're aware, Mayor Bowser has tasked the district with producing a net increase of 36,000 housing units by 2025, with 12,000 of these units being affordable to low-income households. In addition, the mayor's plan calls for these units to be equitably distributed across the city's wards. At the request of the mayor's office, this panel was specifically charged with studying and providing guidance and recommendations as to how best to produce affordable and low-income units in Rock Creek West. Now, Rock Creek West encompasses 13 square miles in the northwest quadrant of the district. It is bounded on the east by Rock Creek, on the northwest by Maryland, and on the south by the Potomac River and Whitehaven Parkway. Rock Creek's most outstanding characteristic is its stable, attractive, single-family neighborhoods. Residential use represents the largest single land use in Rock Creek West, accounting for approximately 37% of total acreage. Of this, 80% is developed with single-family detached homes, 10% with semi-detached homes, and 10% apartments. The vast majority of the single-family homes are owner-occupied, and as a result of the significant presence of single-family homes, densities in the area are well below the citywide average. Rock Creek West, the mayor's call for there to be equitable distribution of affordable and low-income housing across the district's wards poses significant challenges in Rock Creek West. The intention of this panel is to understand the dynamics of the area and propose actionable policies and practices to accomplish the mayor's goal of placing a fair share of the planned increase in housing units, both market rate and affordable, in Rock Creek West. Now I'd like to turn this over to the panel to present our findings. We begin with Heather Worthington, and followed by each panelist speaking on particular issues and recommendations.
Thank you, Phil. Would you advance to the next slide, or who has the clicker? Do you have the clicker?
Mm-hmm.
The slide clicker? Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, there we go. Well, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the city's goal about streamlining and improving the development process. So this was a conversation that we had with many people when we conducted interviews on Tuesday. And one of the city's charges to the panel was to look at how the city could increase social cohesion and community support for affordable housing and for more multifamily housing in the city. And so one of the suggestions we made as part of our panel recommendation is that the mayor begin hosting on social media or in person a quarterly book club that's focused on community conversations about topics of immediate interest related to housing, the issue of race equity, and the issue of the history of racially biased housing policies in the city to educate residents about issues related to housing. We also thought that in order to achieve greater cohesion and make sure that people are meeting their neighbors, more intentional social gatherings would be necessary so that people have an opportunity to meet. We also wanted the city to think about how they treat owners in comparison to renters in their city processes, and if they give a different type of treatment to people who own property rather than rent. And that's just something to keep in mind. We also thought it would be helpful if the city enlisted a speakers bureau, which would help to focus conversations with community groups on issues related to affordable housing and the city's goals. This is a huge effort to go out and really build the civic space around the issue of affordable housing and development. And then finally, we recommend a communication strategy that will use consistent language around race, racial disparities, and affordable housing, and incorporate these concepts into the policy work of the district in every department, program, and project. I'm going to move on to regulatory issues. There are a number of revisions to regulatory processes that we recommended. Thank you, Brad. David, Brian, whoever you are. And I was like, let's just shake it off here. So a couple of the specific provisions that we are recommending are typically used in a planned unit development process. The city utilizes planned unit developments to construct a lot of affordable housing and multifamily housing. And we felt that from the standpoint that the city is being pretty consistently challenged in over the use of PUDs. We felt that it was important for the city to take a look at their zoning and incorporate some or all of those provisions that they utilize typically in PUDs into their zoning code. And so that's one recommendation that the panel is making. We believe that this will ensure more developments that will meet the city's development goals with regard to provisions such as affordable housing, height, setback, and parking. So the other provision that we recommend is that the city create more as-of-right zoning, and that's a term that you'll hear on the panel this morning over and over again, which we think will streamline entitlements. Entitlements are really the process that a developer goes through in order to begin construction on a project. And that process can take a long time depending on different elements within that entitlement process. Things like lawsuits will slow that, and onerous regulations will slow that as well. So development as of right is an important provision in large cities that want to build affordable housing. We also think that the consistent application of these provisions will make development more predictable, both for the community and for developers, which is helpful in that developers know what to expect and can write a pro forma that is more accurate, and the community knows what to expect and can begin to understand how that will impact the community. Finally, we would recommend a comprehensive review of the regulatory and zoning practices of the city and in code, and to ensure that they're not precluding the development or improvement of attainable housing in the city. I think that this is an important issue for us to really highlight for the city today. There is an extreme amount of litigation occurring in the district related to the construction of multifamily and affordable housing. And we believe there's three key recommendations that should be taken under consideration. One is to revise local ordinances that may help the district require that parties filing lawsuits have standing and demonstrable interest in that lawsuit. Right now there is a much broader definition of standing, and we think that needs to be tightened. We would also recommend the creation of a legal defense fund, which would counter the economic power of residents who are wealthy filing lawsuits against affordable housing. Finally, we would ask the city to consider establishing a requirement for posting a legal bond prior to land use related development lawsuits. And then finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about historic preservation. In large cities in America, we've had a process and practice over the last 75 years or so in retaining important architectural assets through historic preservation designation. But we believe that in DC and certainly in other cities that we have worked in, we're starting to see what I like to call the weaponization of historic preservation. And this is where historic preservation tools and regulations are used to block development and slow development. So we believe that the district should review their historic preservation code, processes, and practices, and ensure that ordinances are not being used to block development. Further, we would recommend that the city consider revising their historic preservation regulations so that assets that are cultural but not necessarily architectural are recognized in the city's historic preservation work. This is important, especially for communities of color and cultural communities whose history has been lost over time. And I'm going to pass this on to Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Lieben. You'll have to forgive me, I have a little bit of a cold, so hopefully my voice cooperates here. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to talk about small area plans. And the challenge that we're trying to address through small area plans is that we've heard a lot about how each new development can sort of create its own legal battle. And so development sort of gets re-litigated with each project. And the recommendation that we're providing of small area plans is intended to address that. And what it is it's a way of getting community input, addressing community concerns, getting their buy-in in advance of new development, and focusing on areas that make a lot of sense for development. the many activity centers, commercial activity centers in Rock Creek West. And then translating the kind of agreed upon strategy for densification in those areas into a small area plan, and that small area plan then becomes by right or as of right, which Heather was talking about earlier. And then maybe most importantly, that the small area plan and that by right, that strategy for by right densification become aligned with the zoning plan, the comprehensive plan, and any other policies that the city has, so that there's no ambiguity. And what that will do is it'll reduce the risk of litigation, and therefore reduce development costs and kind of spur development. There's so many great activity centers in Rock Creek West, from Cleveland Park, Glover Park, Tenleytown, Chevy Chase Circle, Friendship Heights, and others. So the city would need to sort of identify those activity centers where it makes sense, and really to prioritize the one where there is sort of underutilization and development potential. And one in particular that we recommend looking at is Friendship Heights. There's a number of large developable parcels that could provide mixed use development with active commercial ground floors and housing above, and create more vibrancy for the neighborhood, as well as provided much needed housing. And the sites there include the WMATA Garage, which it's approximately a 4-acre site that is currently being used to store buses, and we recommend that the city really look at whether it's possible to relocate that or temporarily relocate it, because that, coupled with the adjacent Pepco substation site, could really provide quite a bit of housing on a main commercial corridor there for Wisconsin Avenue. There's also the Galleria parking lot and Lord and Taylor parking lots, which could be upzoned to encourage development. And then there's the Fox 5 headquarters, which is slated to be relocated, which is another large development site. And so what we did is we actually took a look at, we chose the Fox 5 site and took a look at what's possible there, what the zoning is. And so the interesting thing that we found here is on the left here is Wisconsin Avenue, and there's sort of a diagonal dashed line. I don't know if you can kind of see it there. And that is that line is the divide between two different zoning areas. So on the left is a higher density zoning area where you can go up to 90 feet. So that's about an 8-story building. And it provides room for sort of a higher commercial ground floor. And then it drops off pretty drastically to the east, to the right on the screen, and goes down to a 40-foot height, which is in 3 stories and only 40% lot coverage. And so it's a really drastic change on a block that's just off Wisconsin Avenue. And so what we're recommending is that blocks like this be looked at for the possibility of transitional zoning. For instance, that lot on the right could be like a 4 to 6 story height. To get up to 6 stories, you could provide some kind of incentive if there's a certain amount of inclusionary or affordable housing provided in the new development. So you'd be able to, it's just a way of providing more housing, more affordability through upzoning. And this is an example of something that could be worked through in the small area plan process. I'm going to pass it off to Chris Riley.
Next, we have a few suggestions about parking, which plays a huge role in shaping both the form of the built environment and the way we experience it. Currently, DC law imposes parking requirements on lots throughout the district. In commercial and mixed use areas, you can get a discount if you're close to metro rail lines or certain bus lines, but that discount is not available in residential zones. An applicant can seek a special exception for parking requirements, but that sort of reduction is allowed only as to the amount of parking they are physically unable to provide. Parking requirements add huge costs to housing and other uses and can be especially problematic for affordable infill housing. For these reasons and many others, cities across the country have been moving away from requiring off-street parking. Buffalo, Minneapolis, and Hartford have eliminated parking requirements citywide, And a number of other cities, including DC and Austin, have eliminated parking requirements in their downtowns. This trend is based on a growing recognition that parking requirements increase the number of cars on the road and unfairly distribute the cost of car storage across the whole population. Best practices call for the steps you see on this slide: eliminating parking requirements, charging appropriate prices for on-street parking, and directing the proceeds towards the surrounding areas. These ideas are based on the work of Donald Shoup, whose book you see pictured here. Now, sometimes people do get nervous about eliminating parking requirements, but the truth is that with the right pricing, both on-street and off-street parking will be easier to find. So drivers will no longer be circling around in search of parking. Proceeds from charging for parking can be used to support all kinds of improvements: better lighting, sidewalks, bike lanes, or whatever other amenities a neighborhood chooses. As cities around the world step up to the challenges posed by climate change, we expect to see an acceleration of the movement away from parking requirements and toward improved pedestrian environments. The Rock Creek West area presents an opportunity for the district to demonstrate meaningful leadership in this movement. And with that, turn it over to
So I want to present one more quick slide. Can you, there we go. We want to talk a little bit about how the city can help to gain community support through outreach, marketing, and education. And this is really about creating more housing in the district. One of the things that we recommend is that the city undertake an education campaign about affordable housing and development in the district. This is really about having intentional conversations and meaningful outcomes for the district. So there is a long history in every large American city of racialized housing policy. And this history is important in understanding why cities look and work like they do today. And so there is a certain gap in knowledge about this because we have not really taught this in our schools. And so people are not as aware of this history, although I'm sure you are all aware of this history. So we would recommend that the city work with some local academics. We interviewed several people who are quite knowledgeable about this issue in Washington, D.C., and develop a social media and static exhibit that can be used in public spaces like libraries and schools throughout the city. And then as part of a broader communication strategy, really use that history of racialized housing policy in the district as a way to engage people in a problem-solving discussion. And we were asked a couple of times to demonstrate what the racially restrictive covenant language looked like. And so that's what you're reading on the screen here with the text highlighted in red that explicitly excludes people of color and immigrant populations from living in single-family neighborhoods. This is an example of racially restrictive covenant language from Hennepin County, which is the county that I work in. But this was common throughout the United States. And I would just recommend to you that there's a great resource online called Mapping Prejudice you can look at, which is an effort to map racially restrictive covenant language throughout the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Thanks. We recommend the district engage the faith community in the goal of increasing housing in Rock Creek West. Faith organizations in the district share values and have demonstrated their commitment to advancing their missions through housing and using their land to facilitate development and be a resource to their faith institutions for a sound financial future. These institutions have significant underutilized land resources and may have underfunded deferred maintenance on their existing buildings. A partnership with these institutions would be beneficial to both parties. We recommend the district help re-engage with affordable housing developers, including the DC Local Initiative Support Corporation, MICASA, and the Enterprise Community Partners faith-based Development Initiative, and engage these with organized faith networks, including the Good Faith Communities Coalition, the Washington Interfaith Network, to advance the conversation to identify specific parcels and opportunities for affordable housing and development.
We also have recommendation to the leadership and to the mayoral staff that there be further marketing and education when it comes to the housing policies, and communicate their vision and the city's vision to the population and stakeholders. We got consistent feedback from people that were both positive and negative. One criticism was a historical lack of messaging and support for what the policies that have been rolled out looked like. On a very positive side, from supporters, the mayor's active promotion and defense of emergency family services shelter in Rock Creek West is an example of successful marketing and messaging, and clearly a political will to have it accomplished. Even with clear housing goals, historically, there's not necessarily been very specific action steps taken that have been shared with the community, and bringing advocates to the table to help support and educate the population generally. So we recommend taking an active education and PR campaign, similar to what Heather recommended, both from an education standpoint, in that case for the population, but in this case, to educate the population about what the plan is. We create a marketing action by the administration might consider, they might consider educating the community and promote programs via social media campaigns and community engagement. Actively work to destigmatize rental housing. There's many people from all income strata who use rental housing, and many people are moving from home ownership back into rental, and it shouldn't be considered a second-class citizen. Actively support and advocate and even celebrate projects that are desired and have helped execute the overall plan. And increasing density around the transit stations is a, sorry, I moved on. We're going to move on here from to a goal of creating some more housing as one of the things that we're trying to obtain.
So, development's hard, and there are a lot of risks involved. Investors need to be compensated, for example, for risking their capital. It's really a his story, her story, and the truth. People talk about rich, greedy developers. The developers are saying, wait a minute, I'm standing here with my pants around my ankles. And the reality is that developers need to be compensated for the risk that they're taking, but it's not quite as good as it looks. Next slide. Rock Creek West has lots of things going for it. And we can more than achieve the goal of adding 2,500 dwelling units, which is the number that's been bantered about for Rock Creek West, by gently adding density. So we've deliberately framed the conversation as an opportunity and not as a challenge. There's a moral imperative to add this housing, and also to embrace the diversity that goes with it. Things evolve over time, and diversity benefits everyone. The 80-20 rule is probably more like a 99-1 rule here. The publicity magnifies stories, and impacts are probably relatively mundane overall. There have been articles in the paper drawing attention to some projects, but it's really probably been some isolated incidents that's garnered an outsized amount of attention. And finally, the question is, how do we organize this growth responsibly? Existing neighborhoods have room to add missing middle housing, And this can come in many forms. All right. Corridors are opportunities to add denser housing without upsetting the neighborhood character. And we can do more, as I said in word 3, than the 2,500 units that have been discussed. Okay. So let's just geek out on zoning for a minute here. We've got Euclidean zoning. This is not similar to Socratic zoning or zoning by Pleiades. It's a court case, but there's a difference, and like the Greeks, it's a philosophical one. Euclidean zoning organizes land by use, and then there's something called form-based code, and there we organize by building character and size and mass and scale. And so what we want to think about talking about adding housing to an area, we want to think about it in terms of how we add scale to the area. And we can do this in a way that's not going to change the character of the community it's not going to be like we're going to scrape the whole thing and start over again, which I think is a fear that, that has been expressed. Okay. So this rubric this form-based rubric makes it easier to discuss and get our arms around adding housing and density, and it takes some of the superlative out of the conversation. Accessory dwelling units are almost invisible, but there's a huge amount of opportunity for them in the Rock Creek West Plan area. Okay. Density along corridors makes sense. So there's already density along corridors, so it's increasing something that is already happening. And so we match density with density. We don't want to keep missing opportunities. And Cathedral Commons and the Sears redevelopment at Tenleytown, those were opportunities that in many ways were missed because they could be missed, but they shouldn't have been. And so there was misplaced opposition. And like we talked about a few slides ago, some of my fellow panel members commented on this. All right. Let's get into my world of economics a little bit and talk about understanding externalities, because understanding externalities is key to success here. All right. So externalities, simply put, are the unintended leftovers, and they can be both good and bad. All right. So, for example, if you build a couple of buildings, yeah, perfect. If you build a couple of buildings along a narrow street, there's going to be a bunch of shade on the street. So negative externality is that their natural light is taken away. Now in Washington in the summertime, this might be considered a positive externality. All right, now we can. But the key is that adding density to any community, the key is in managing the externalities. Not keeping new development out, but managing the side effects of the development, both good and bad. And there is good and bad. So positive externalities, include a more inclusive community and a diverse community, and moderating housing prices, having jobs and homes closer to each other. And negative externalities, might include added traffic, because more homes means more trips. But on the other hand, we have a robust transportation network here, and enhancing that already robust transportation infrastructure would be a way to mitigate or manage the negative externality. Right. So let's shift gears for a minute and talk about retail, because really, retail can help define an area. Everybody likes to go for a walk on a nice warm summer evening to go get an ice cream cone. It's not something that is income specific. And so retail is demand driven. In other words, the demand for the retail comes before the retail. All right, next. And so there's a direct relationship between housing and retail, because adding density will benefit the retail scene, both in terms of the quantity of retail and the variety of the retail. So a single-story building, and this is a picture, the top picture is Cleveland Park, represents underdevelopment in today's world. And so redeveloping single-story retail so that there is residential over the retail solves two problems: more residential, more demand for retail. Now, there's probably somebody out here who's saying, wait a minute, I like the way that building looks. So if you take it down, that's a negative externality. But you can mitigate the negative externality either through documenting or having the new structure refer back to the older structure. So this isn't necessarily a black and white win or lose proposition. So the thing that I really want to drive home here is that it's about maximizing co-benefits. And if you are familiar with ULI's principles of resiliency, maximizing benefits is one of the key tenets of a resilient community and resilient strategy. And I think it tells us that we're on the right track. Density bonuses incent developers to create something we want. So for example, retail or below market units in exchange for something the developer wants, like the ability to build more than they would be able to build otherwise. In other words, you give us more of what we want, we'll let you build more, and everybody ends up winning. Okay? And so we can use density bonuses to direct developer behavior. So a couple of examples of projects that I've worked on. I'm going to take you to California. In Oakland, the Broadway-Valdez specific plan gave density bonuses for creating viable, well-designed retail. In other words, you can build 2 levels of retail if you just want to do retail, but if you give us what we want on the ground level here, you can build 5 levels of retail, or 5 levels of residential. Okay, and then another one is in downtown San Jose, where we use design guidelines so that space would be designed to accommodate desired retail uses as demand evolves and to preserve key retail nodes from going to non-retail uses. So these overlays, density bonuses, incentives can be used to help push us in the direction that we want the community to go.
Thanks, David. I want to shift gears for just a minute. Most of the conversation today has been around rental housing, but I think it's important not to forget how important first-time home ownership and that rung in the housing ladder is. After all, every time someone becomes a homeowner, they're moving out of a rental unit and freeing one of those up. But it's very important that people have the opportunity to move up that housing value ladder over time. This recommendation focuses particularly on affordable ownership opportunities that are created through shared equity strategies. Now, we all know that in the 90s and 2000s, far too many Washingtonians lost their homes. And frankly, today, it's very difficult for most Washingtonians to become homeowners. I think the cost of a median priced home is about 4.5 times the average income in Washington today. And shared equity strategies are a strategy to subsidize income qualified buyers' home purchases. And what these strategies do is exchange that subsidy for sharing the equity on the resale of the home. And this has proved a really effective tool around the country at extending home ownership to households that are unable to qualify for conventional mortgages and would otherwise be unable to buy a home. Now, most affordable housing programs are leaky buckets. Over time, affordability periods for subsidized rental units expire, and affordable ownership opportunities affordable ownership properties accumulate value and are no longer affordable. And so many of the shared equity programs adopt permanent affordability strategies as well. To maximize their housing investments, they look at things like community land trusts, ground leases, deed restrictions, limited equity cooperatives. These are the most popular kinds of shared equity approaches that we've seen. In the case of the land trusts and the cooperatives, communities enjoy the additional benefit of property stewardship. So this ensures that these properties are maintained on a long-term and permanent basis even, and this helps preserve neighborhood character and prevent blight. The panel recommends that the district establish and expand its partnerships with shared equity providers to establish permanent pathways to ownership for lower income households. The panel further recommends that permanent affordability be maintained by regulations that require units to be sold at an affordable price to subsequent income qualified borrowers. And next, just a couple of words about the inclusionary zoning program. We heard in some of our interviews that there are times when it feels like as economic changes occur that some of the policies don't keep up. So we're talking about income limits, written payment standards, percentages of affordable units. And sometimes those no longer comport with market realities. And that undermines both production and housing affordability. So the panel recommends that the district more frequently review and update its IZ regulations, policies, and administrative procedures to ensure that they're economically feasible, appropriately targeted, and that they're effectively managed for impact. Now, one of the most difficult impediments to development of affordable homes in Rock Creek West is the cost of land. Land costs are so high that developing rental or ownership units affordable to moderate and lower incomes is virtually impossible without some kind of subsidy. Jurisdictions sometimes create land banks to acquire and transfer properties to achieve community goals. In some cases, these land banks are used primarily as a tool to eliminate blight, but they also have the potential to enable affordable development by subsidizing the cost of land. So the panel recommends that the district consider subsidizing development by creating a local land bank to acquire land in Rock Creek West and throughout the district to use, donate, lease, and sell at a discount for the development of affordable homes. Now, David spoke some about density and how that affects local communities, particularly in a retail sense. When land is scarce, like it is here, increasing density is an indispensable way to meet growing housing needs and to maintain or improve housing affordability. More market rate units would also generate additional revenue, and that could then be leveraged to improve affordability. Density also is more investment ready. It reduces traffic congestion by minimizing time and distances to work and leisure. It increases environmental sustainability, reduces the carbon footprint, offers more amenities and opportunities in areas that may have been underinvested in the past. And this can all be achieved without having to build high-rises. The panel recommends the district consider providing voluntary density bonuses that support the production of low-cost units in the district. Density could be developed as a matter of right in exchange for actions such as developing projects in which all units are affordable to households earning less than 80% of the median income, by setting aside affordable units over and above what's required under mandatory inclusionary zoning, and by donating property for the development of affordable housing. And to enable density, the district should also consider offering exemptions from zoning requirements, such as the parking requirements that were discussed earlier that significantly increase cost and could prevent higher density developments from penciling.
Thank you. We recommend the district promote the creation of accessory apartments, also called accessory dwelling units, by streamlining the construction and conversion process and expanding subsidy programs. An accessory apartment is a secondary living unit on a single family residential lot, also known as granny flats. Carriage houses, garage conversions, and they were legalized in the district in 2016. Accessory apartments offer a new asset and make it possible to age in place and offer a supportive range of housing options to meet changing intergenerational and other family needs. Accessory apartments can make more housing options for those with accessibility and ability limitations, as well as provide a financial tool to age in place. Accessory apartments can provide that supplemental income for the homeowners. To date, fewer than 100 accessory apartments have been developed throughout the district since the zoning change. Identifying challenges to developing accessory apartments include managing unit development, construction costs, access to financing for development of these units, and licensing and zoning processing costs. So to meet these challenges, the panel recommends the city considered first streamlining contracting, permitting, licensing, and zoning processes. The process for permitting, design, and construction are frequently beyond the abilities of people who want to create these accessory apartments. We recommend that the city facilitate the creation of the accessory apartment assistance program, whereby people would be able to call a single source to obtain assistance with determining the feasibility of an accessory apartment project, permitting, design, and construction. We believe this would result in meaningful increase in the creation of accessory apartments. Second, provide new financing options. Recent approaches by other cities include, in Boston, Massachusetts, the additional dwelling unit loan pilot project provides interest-free loans of up to $30,000 for accessory apartments, remodeling projects with no monthly payments, and loans that do not become due until the homeowner transfers ownership or takes a cash out refinance. Second, in Portland, Oregon, a nonprofit ran the Place for You program, provided homeowners with a 380 square foot, 1-bedroom accessory apartment at no cost for exchange for providing rent-free housing for a person or family who was formerly facing homelessness for 5 years. And in Los Angeles, the second dwelling unit loan program, also tied to public policy priorities, and encourages the development of accessory apartments units by streamlining permitting processes, providing technical assistance to homeowners, and providing financing options, and promoting accessory apartments through an architectural design competition. In addition, the county also provides a maximum subsidy for $75,000 for new units and $50,000 for rehab units to build accessory apartments. And that is in the form of a forgivable loan, and it's tied to the commitment for those apartments to be used for, in Los Angeles, a family or individual that was formerly facing homelessness, or they participate in the housing choice and voucher program. So in fact, we believe that accessory apartments are one of the best opportunities for housing production in Rock Creek West. There are approximately 17,700 single-family lots of homes in Rock Creek West, and if just 14% of those created an accessory apartment, we'd arrive at 2,500 newly created units. This is just an illustrative example, and it's just to highlight the potential for accessory apartments to be a housing development tool that could bring the desired scale of production. It would be driven by individual decision makers and homeowners taking action to use this new asset that's available in the zoning code for homeowners.
Given Rock Creek West's limited inventory of available sites, achieving affordability goals in this area is going to require creative approaches and partnerships. One way to increase the number of housing opportunities is to make better use of publicly owned properties. The image you see here shows a building in San Francisco that provides homes for 140 very low income seniors above a branch library at the ground level. The district has an inventory of parcels that represent untapped opportunities to provide affordable and mixed income housing. I know there's been some discussion about doing that at the Tenleytown Library. There are other libraries that are on the horizon that are going to need renovation or replacement at some point, like the Chevy Chase Neighborhood Library. And there are a number of other community facilities in the district that could provide suitable locations for affordable housing. A comprehensive strategy to move in this direction could include public-private partnerships throughout the, between city agencies and affordable housing developers, requiring that new public facility developments and redevelopments include affordable housing components whenever feasible, and a process for receiving unsolicited bids for more intense utilization of publicly owned parcels. Maximizing the use of the city's properties would be especially helpful given the high land acquisition costs throughout the study area. And additionally, another advantage of this approach is that making use of these properties could enable the city to meet housing goals across a very broad range of needs. You could do 100% affordable or mixed income housing with a lot of affordable units. You could also reach more deeply targeted housing, the kind of housing, say from 0 to 60%, 50%, 60%, that's the kind of levels that are hard to reach through inclusionary zoning. By locating affordable housing with community facilities, the district could bring community services closer to those who need them, making life easier for everyone. Next, we suggest that the district consider master leasing existing housing on a trial basis. The district's inclusionary zoning and rental assistance programs depend on landlord-tenant relationships between property owners and program participants. This can lead to friction involving additional hurdles for low-income individuals and difficulties that make some landlords reluctant to continue participating in the programs. The district could ease some of this friction and broaden housing opportunities by stepping into a lessee role, either directly or through a nonprofit partner, and subletting units to lower income tenants. By acting as a master leaser, the district could make affordable units available quickly, enabling it to scale the placement of applicants more readily. This approach could be especially well suited for rent-controlled units in which rent increases are capped. To ensure accountability and avoid confusion and other issues, all parties will need to communicate clearly about goals and expectations. As a lessee, the city or its nonprofit partner must be ready to respond quickly to any issues that arise. Similar programs have worked well elsewhere to provide housing for those who otherwise wouldn't be able to attain it, which is an important part of the city's goals.
Another recommendation by the panel is to upzone specific areas near transit. An example might be within a half a mile of metro stops or a quarter mile of bus corridors, major streets. Currently, the greatest density is along the major corridors anyways. Retail services are located there, major traffic is there, specifically along Wisconsin and Connecticut Avenue. Frankly, as you move farther south towards the city, you see the density of the pre-World War buildings that are beautiful and don't change the environment around them, and yet provide a lot more housing than is currently allowable under current laws. Accepted national research promotes the area economic and social benefits of mixed-use developments around mass transit. Tends to be the area where people get the best services. And resistance to development in the Rock Creek West area oftentimes is focused on retaining the character and the low density of the neighborhoods. And frankly, in the transit corridors and the major streets, you see a lot less of this, and frankly, it's perfect location for more density. Therefore, we recommend additional density be allowed through modified zoning as opposed to forcing this under a PUD, as was discussed earlier. The benefits to mixed-use development around transit extends to the entire community. Oftentimes, and as what was mentioned earlier in a conversation around retail, you have favorite retail establishments, whether they're restaurants or stores, and they don't survive, frankly, because even though you love them and you go there once a month, that's not enough to sustain. But if you have denser population, especially people that live above and around the retail, they tend to use it more frequently. And even further, if it's located near transit locations, you end up with retail tenants that are very supportive of transit. So people going to work get their coffee, coming home get their groceries or visit their drugstores. Residents who live in these properties tend to support the retail and the restaurants on more of an 18-hour basis instead of a normal 6 or 7 hour basis. Increasing density around transit stations has low impact on the existing community. The benefits are very significant, and that's probably the strongest statement we can make. Residents of apartments are some of the highest users of public transit, so why not help them locate closer, making the metro much more walkable and keeping traffic off the arterial streets in the neighborhoods. And increased density ultimately drives down the costs. We come back all the way around to a conversation of existing projects that were developed recently, where there probably was a willingness to go deeper into both affordability and diversity of the offerings if more density had been allowed. Therefore, we recommend, to reiterate, additional density around high traffic corridors and specifically around metro stations.
Okay.
Those of you who aren't familiar with the panel process, there's not without glitches that occur frequently at the last minute. So Brad became ill. One of the things you do is you get so tired you can't remember people's names, but Brad became ill in the middle of the panel. Just for your information, he's been awarded a Silver Cross for duty, for dedication and duty beyond the call. Christopher's computer had a sort of a grand mal seizure, the result of which he lost his entire presentation and had to stay up all night recreating it. I left, my notes, my copy of the hard slides with my bullet point notes, which would have made it easier for me to talk without using this stupid script, is laying in the hotel business center beside the computer that I was using early this morning to do some last minute fact checking. And the slide that was supposed to be before this one, somewhere between midnight and 1 o'clock this morning, magically disappeared. If it was here, it would talk to you about the fact that DC is not alone in facing this issue. It's an issue that is being currently faced by every major city in the United States, in fact, every major city in the world. And it has been filtering down now to more modest and smaller towns after years of underproduction of housing. That's what it said. Oh, and by the way, it also said that ULI has done a number of panels all around the country on this precise issue. It is not an issue that's new to us. It would have shown some of the sort of common recommendations that we've built up over all these panels. Just trust me, they're there, and they will be in the final report. So this slide is a summary of the panel's conclusion and recommendations. In the interest of time, I am not going to sit here and try to read it. First of all, I'd have to turn around, but it will remain up for the remainder of the session and all the way through the Q&A period. Of these recommendations, we believe that the following are ready for immediate action: the creation and implementation of a communication plan, the creation and implementation of a community education plan, the creation of an auxiliary dwelling unit assistance program, the creation of a campaign to promote the immediate development of auxiliary dwelling units, a review of the auxiliary dwelling unit rules and regulations with a goal of simplifying and streamlining the process, as well as consideration of increasing incentives to encourage the production of auxiliary dwelling units. Why do we have all these on auxiliary dwelling units? Because it is the easiest and fastest way to begin to address this problem. To begin the conversation with the faith-based community around use of the land they possess in order to provide for the development of low-income housing, and to discuss how they can assist in advocacy efforts. Establish a schedule of meetings and programs to provide for the public discussion of the issues of race and institutional bias and the impact of racially biased programs, both historic and present, on the access to housing. I also want you to know that there were many matters we discussed and possible recommendations that were discussed and sort of rejected at this time. These include the declaration of a state of emergency to address the lack of affordable housing, the elimination of single-family zoning, and an effort to increase school capacity. It's not that we're totally rejecting those items, it's just that we don't believe at the current moment is the right time to pursue them. While the panel's discussion was limited to the issues of providing affordable housing in Rock Creek West, we believe that there are a few items of which you need to be aware. First is capital requirements. The mayor's plan will require a significant amount of capital. The all-in cost of developing a rental unit in the district is approximately $400,000 to $500,000 per unit. If you take the average of those two numbers, 450,000, producing 36,000 units across the district will require approximately $16.2 billion. For Rock Creek West alone, assuming an average cost of 450,000, again, with an estimated number of 2,500 units, the capital required would be approximately $1.125 billion. While a meaningful portion of this capital could be attained in the form of loans, the equity required, in the opinion of the panel, is beyond the capacity of the city government without the assistance and involvement of the federal government and the private sector real estate and investment communities. In addition, the use of private sector real estate capitalization model in which modest amounts of government and public sector funds are leveraged with substantial amounts of private investment capital in market rate loans proceeds can allow for the production of significant numbers of residential units with limited government and public funds. Second is pricing. Housing is essentially a commodity. And for any commodity, whether it be corn, oil, housing, or my personal favorite, pork bellies, pricing is a function of supply and demand. During periods of undersupply, prices will rise as consumers compete for limited product, and during periods of oversupply, prices decline as producers compete for our customers. During our interview process, a number of people expressed skepticism over this model, citing that prices in the district had continued to rise despite significant construction of new units. While it is true that there has not been a decrease in pricing in the district, even with all the development, the issue is not the number of units delivered, but the relationship between supply and demand. Between 2010 and 2017, the district's population grew by approximately 92,250 people, while only 18,000 units were delivered. So even though there were a significant number of units delivered, the gap between supply and demand continued to increase. Until supply and demand for housing are brought into into a balanced situation, increases in pricing beyond inflation and rising construction costs will continue to increase. Lastly, lack of housing. It is important to note that addressing the need of affordable housing for low-income residents will not, in and of itself, resolve the issue of an overall lack of housing in the district. Even if every low-income family was provided with housing, until there is a balance in the remaining housing supply, there will be people who are left out. The one thing that is absolutely certain is that the wealthy will always have housing. If luxury units are being taken by high-income individuals and affordable units are being taken by low-income individuals, the result is moderate and low-moderate income families will find it harder and harder to find housing that is affordable to them. The only solution for this is for the government and the private sector to work together to produce sufficient housing for all price ranges or all income ranges. Okay, with that, I would like to turn it over to the audience for questions. And if you have a question that you want a particular panelist to address, if you would just say their name and ask the question, they'll take it. For those where you don't have a specific question, if you'll address it to me, I will find the person most aligned to answer the question. Ma'am, I think you were the first back there.
Oh, you're holding on to it, so I can't. No. I'm not going to be that long. Thank you very much. This is very useful information. One question I had is on the accessory units or auxiliary. I suppose they're the same thing. That's a very interesting concept, and I wonder if you think about it both ways. I mean, that is that for you could use the accessory unit for the affordable housing as opposed to the main unit, and it would work just as well, particularly for the aging population in DC who finds the cost of living, you know, higher and higher. That's a question. And a comment. I happen to meet so much of your demographics. I live 2 blocks away in that new construction on Wisconsin Avenue, which I would never move into again. And the reason, and I have an inclusionary zoning dwelling, but I would never do it again because the emphasis on housing and not on creating better living, I understand this is a housing study, is a problem. It's too dense, it's too small, there's too much going on there. There are rats created by those cheap restaurants. Many of my concerns could be related to age, and so therefore, if you're targeting a much younger demographic, you might be able to make it, but nobody's happy who lives around there with what's going on with that densely populated area. Thank you.
So the first question I heard there was use of accessory or auxiliary. Like to have a lot of words, but same thing. Thanks for tracing. For both affordable housing and for other folks. So yes, so just one way to get to affordable housing is a smaller unit or a basement unit or less cost to create that new unit. It was quoted that additional cost to create a new unit, all in, land, everything else, is $400,000 to $500,000. It does not take $400,000 to $500,000 to create one more accessory apartment. And so both from the cost basis, also how much space you're using, both of those things would provide a more affordable unit than the market's providing today. Please.
When it comes to accessory dwelling units, I think the other important thing is that many of these neighborhoods do not have life cycle housing. So if you're an elderly person living in a large single family home, you don't have many options in terms of downsizing into a smaller unit and staying in that area. So one way to think about an ADU approach is that you are able to stay in your home longer because you can have a home health care worker living in that unit, or you yourself can live in that unit and have a family move into the larger home. So there are many different ways to think about that ADU product as a way to improve life cycle housing in neighborhoods.
Yes, sir.
Hi. There were a lot of good ideas here, and I want to thank you for doing it. I hope my city will pay attention. I have a comment that leads into a question, and it's going to be directed mainly at the economist there, the fellow who spoke about negative externalities. And I am in favor of increased density and diversity. That said, one of the biggest arguments against it, and sometimes this masks racist and classist prejudices, is traffic and parking. And even though I want more development, I don't like a lot of traffic either. And I'm going to push you just a little bit. I think you all are experts in real estate, but and you touched on it a little bit, but to me, you one possible missed opportunity here is really confronting the transportation piece of this. And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think that the real problem is car addiction. So if we can get people out of their cars, this can be a good thing. But in order to have high density work and to address those traffic parking problems, then you got to say, all right, we are also going to increase public transportation, whether it's buses or whatever. We are going to increase pedestrian safety. We've got a huge problem in the city of pedestrian and bicycle deaths, okay? And increasing density means more death, okay? And you guys aren't really confronting that as directly as I wish you would. And protected bike lanes is another way to do it. Traffic calming. This has all got to be part of it, in my opinion, and it isn't in your recommendation. And so I'll end with my question, why not?
Well, there are 168 hours in a week. And that's tongue-in-cheek, but also meant to be very serious. There were a lot of directions that the panel went, and where we, caught ourselves going down a rabbit hole, and we had to make a decision that, this is a legitimate question, but we need to stick to our knitting just because we have a limited amount of time and we have been asked a specific question. So part of it is that we were first and foremost interested in addressing the question that we were charged with, okay? That said, that said, I think you bring up some really good points. I am glad that you brought up the point about the dog whistles for racism, and we noted that this was not a panel about race relations. That was one of the rabbit holes. So we made a decision that we were not going to address that. But yes, we heard it. There were, that other people would not be comfortable in our stores, comfortable in our schools, all of these things. I think that really has to be noted, particularly in an area that has a history going back nearly 150 years of institutionalized racism. Secondly, traffic, car addiction. Couldn't agree with you more. I live in California. One of the things that we have realized is that if you add a lane to a freeway, the traffic does not decrease. You have, it just fills up. So what do? We start looking at high occupancy volume lanes as a way to try to put more people into the cars that are already on the freeway and incent them with the ability to get from point A to point B more quickly. So complete streets, trying to retrain people about how to get from here to there. And frankly, eliminating parking minimums, which would then make it more difficult to drive. We have great transportation infrastructure in the city. Ironically, Rock Creek West is one of the places with more challenging transportation infrastructure because a lot of the land is away from metro stations. So yes, I completely agree with you that transportation needs to be addressed. And it would be an outstanding topic for another panel addressing the same area and the same larger world of issues.
If I can add just a few words to that. This issue is of automatic increased traffic and things, density is somewhat of a myth. There are recent studies showing, I just read one on the plane up here, that it's talking about the densification of the world, where people are migrating to cities, and what they're finding is that actually may be one of the best things for us dealing with climate change, because as people move into a denser environment, what you have is less what I call people miles, okay? People aren't driving cars for nearly as much miles. Walkable communities eliminate the need to drive. Public transportation is more available than if you live way out in the country somewhere. And so this idea that automatically by increasing density that you're increasing this traffic situation is just not totally true, okay? What buried in this thing, which was not on this topic, but buried in that you heard things like walkable communities, increasing types of retail that are available within walking distance of the units, keeping the density isolated around the transportation nodes and corridors so that public transportation is available. One of the rapidly growing trends in this country is younger people who live in cities don't even own cars. They might have bikes, they might have scooters, they might have, $500 tennis shoes, walking shoes, but they do not own cars. And so that is why it's just not automatically true. And this would be a great subject for another panel to go into depth, and why we don't have more time, because the classic panel is designed to be from Sunday till Friday morning, partially because the people were donating their time and giving up a week of their lives, and partially because the shortage of time has an effect of actually focusing your attention. Okay.
One more comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to add I totally agree with you. I mean, I think that, hopefully okay, so backing up, I think that densification is really, we need to, one of the greatest selling points I think of it is the environmental sustainability benefits. When you create more housing opportunities close to transit, what you have is people that are, older folks that are empty nesters that want to, that no longer want to live in a single family home that's further away from transit, can have the opportunity to relocate to a smaller unit of housing, and maybe to give up one of their cars or both of their cars because they're right next to transit. And what it also does is it creates opportunities for folks that when there's more housing in the urban centers, people that work in those urban centers can actually it's easier and more affordable for them to live closer to where they work. So they're no longer commuting an hour or so from the suburbs or something, because there's more supply in the urban centers where they work. And so I think that, I think that you're absolutely right that we want to encourage densification around transit, and then the transit, the transit systems need to, as growth happens, need to adjust and accommodate that growth and more users. And there is a trend also, especially among younger demographics, to own less cars, which is another reason why providing more affordability for younger families is really important in these areas.
Sir, go ahead.
So, my name is Akash Thakar, so I'm a Ward 3 resident, live about 3 blocks, I should say, from Friendship Heights. So just some comments, no questions really. Number one, thank you guys for your work. I've sat through a fair number of panels and participated on them, and you guys did a very, very thorough job in sort of articulating all the issues and coming up with thoughtful recommendations. So thank you as a city resident. So living in Ward 3, I have an accessory dwelling unit, and I will tell you, I'm one of the first, I think, in the city to go through the legal process, and some of my neighbors weren't particularly happy with me. So it's just something to think about, in terms of a need for change. That I love my neighborhood for many reasons. The 2 reasons I don't like it are, number one, a lack of diversity in all ways. So socioeconomic diversity, racial diversity, and even age diversity, right? I mean, you have a very sort of consistent population. I'm on the young side in Ward 3 because of the housing type and the great single family housing stock. So I agree with you totally in terms of a need for diversification. And then secondly, interestingly, I grew up in the city, went to St. Anne's right around the corner for grade school. And Ward 3 used to be the place to go for restaurants and retail. It was like the place to be. And now, as the rest of the city has evolved and grown, the cool restaurants and the cool chefs and the places to shop and the vibrancy and the diversity are no longer in our ward. So that saddens me as a resident. And I think, your recommendation, to cut to the chase of my thought, is by upzoning and building more density smartly around the 5 metro stations. We have a ton of metro stations in this ward. You could achieve far more affordable housing. You can get to that diversity. You can provide some of those cool restaurants and amenities that a broad groups of folks could utilize. So, I appreciate that recommendation in particular, because I think it's a way to sort of quickly get at addressing a lot of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, panel. My name is Patricia Harris Bentley. I'm a new member of ULI, and so it's really exciting to be here and to see this process and see what you all do here. One of the things that I did want to mention is that I know that you all were charged with looking at the challenges with regard to affordable housing within Washington, D.C. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that even though we are focused on Washington, D.C., and I really love the breadth of the recommendations that you were able to come up with in a short period of time. With regard to some of the problems that we have and folks moving into Washington, D.C., maybe looking at more working with regional partners, because certainly a lot of folks are moving into D.C. because they want to be closer to work and different things. But maybe if maybe part of the problem can be alleviated by thinking in terms of regional housing and the transportation, people commuting in. We have a lot of folks who are driving in. We do have a great transportation infrastructure, so it's probably not as much as in other cities, say like in LA, but kind of thinking broadly in terms of working with regional partners on not only the housing issue and keeping in mind the thoughts in terms of where people want to live, the commuting patterns, and just broadly in terms of the mutual interest that DC has with its neighbors, and even possibly cost sharing in some of those aspects as well with regard to infrastructure that would allow for more efficient commuting, more public transportation. So,
thanks for that comment. I should mention that there is a Council of Governments in the region, and that entity, from a policy standpoint, is also looking at the needs of the region in terms of affordable housing going forward. So they have set goals around that. So I'd recommend their website. Is it Metropolitan DC Council of Governments? WCDOCODG. There we go. So take a look at that. Thank you.
And I think just one stat to note. I got a funny name for being the guy with the stats. So that in just Rock Creek West area, there are, of the people, there are 40,000 people. So of the 40 or so thousand workers, most of those leave the area to work. About 4,000 stay in the area to work, and about 42,000 people come in every day to work. So there's actually a lot of connection to that regional conversation. So just want to add that.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Adrian. I'm actually from the ULI headquarters here in DC. I recently moved out here from San Francisco. I have a bit of a background working with urban transportation nonprofits specifically. And my question for you all is, have you all given any thought as to not only the existing state of transportation in the area, but the future of transportation in terms of what we might be seeing in the coming years with the rise of autonomous vehicles, restructuring parking garages, as well as an increase in multimodal transportation and the opportunities that it provides for previously underrepresented communities?
I'll take a shot at this one first and then pass the mic. But connected and automated vehicles, I think, is something that's coming. I think there's a lot of divergent thought about how quickly it's coming. But I think the most important area to focus in when it comes to connected automated right now is the policy side and the actual regulation of vehicles, so that they are not just autonomous, but that they are required to be connected. Because that will have the largest impact on our communities in terms of signalized intersections, emergency emergency vehicle preemption systems, which we all have with our, here in DC with Metro, here in Minneapolis with light rail. So those systems are extremely expensive and aging. And so we need to really figure out the policy side of connecting those automated vehicles right now, and lay that in process legislatively and get ahead of that. That's my opinion and the opinion of my colleagues in Minnesota that have been studying this issue.
If I could just add one comment. I have thought a lot about the future of transportation around here. As somebody who gets around mainly by bicycle, we were on Connecticut, and I was amazed to see how many people actually get out and brave the conditions on Connecticut, even on bicycle, even today, which is amazing. I was glad to see in some of the planning efforts that have gone on in the past, there has been some discussion about adding protected lanes to Connecticut. And I really think as planning, as the small area plans and corridor plans move forward, we really need to look very seriously at getting protected facilities, especially on all of those main corridors. You really need a fully connected network of protected bike lanes. And when I think about the future of transportation here, that's a key part of what I hope to see.
What, can I answer that, or do we want? Okay. Yeah, I think really quick. I think that the idea that there may be more underutilized parking in the future with autonomous vehicles is a really good one, and something that, you know, the district should really think about. Even today, there's probably, I know in San Francisco, the average affordable housing development has 30% underutilized, unused parking, basically. So there's a huge opportunity for gentle density in former surface or even structured parking.
Thank you, panel, for your investing your time in DC. Having been laser focused on both affordable housing and homelessness in DC for the last 10 years, we've very much welcomed what Muriel has done in bringing a real focus in this city to addressing both issues. There are 2 wards in DC, one of which is Ward 3, or as you're describing it, west of Rock Creek, that carry the lion's share of the thousands of rent-controlled units throughout DC, in which many are occupied by low-income seniors. Will these rent-control units be counted in your affordable housing counts as you do your work, or are you categorically discounting those from your count? And if so, why? Thank you.
If I could just offer a note, we would not be discounting those at all. Our task was to identify opportunities for new housing. So I very much hope to see those rent-controlled units stay in place, because they do provide such valuable opportunities, especially for seniors. But we really, the concern is about getting new housing. And I understand we are getting more rent-controlled units, but we're trying to provide more and more opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of, I think what you're talking about are people who have aged in place, and that is, and have, you know, sort of grandfathered rental situation, you know, by virtue of being in a pre-1975 unit. I think, though, that Rock Creek West, Ward 3, has the ability to do more. For example, the ward has about 12.5% of the city's population, but only 1.2% of the affordable housing vouchers distributed across the city are in the Rock Creek West area. So I would say that if seniors are disproportionately represented here, that I would like to call that a good start.
Wanted to, hi, again, thank you for the comprehensive report that you provided, but I just wanted to follow up a little bit on both the seniors and the ADU proposals, in that it seems to me there's no requirement now that either of the 2 units, the main house or the accessory unit, be accessible to someone with disabilities of any sort. And it seems to me that particularly if this is considered desirable for aging in place, that at least one of the units should be required to be made accessible, and if not required, at least have incentives to the developer so that at least one of them is accessible.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was wondering, you mentioned considering eliminating the single-family zoning, and that didn't end up being one of your recommendations. When you were considering that, was that eliminating all single-family zoning or exclusive? And was it Minneapolis that did that recently? So I was just kind of wondering about the thinking behind that, and I'm having trouble seeing the downside of, having that sort of mixed density, like your garden style apartments or your condos next to single family zoning, especially homes, especially, in Ward 3.
I can speak to why Minneapolis made that decision. So there were two reasons. One is that we wanted to see greater access to highly amenitized neighborhoods like Rock Creek West in Minneapolis that had only single family zoning available to them. And so we wanted to see a greater variety of housing, a greater typology of housing happening in those neighborhoods to provide more access for residents of lower incomes so that they could access the highly amenitized areas. The second reason that we wanted to eliminate just single family zoning in those areas was that we heard from many residents of those areas who wanted to age in place but did not have an opportunity to do that because the only product available to them was a single family house. And so that zoning recommendation was made for that reason. Now, we did not eliminate single family housing. I want to make sure we're talking about the right thing here. We're not getting rid of single family houses. We're saying if you want to build a single family house in the future, you can. You could also build up to 3 units on that lot in any configuration. And we do also allow accessory dwelling units in Minneapolis. So you could have a duplex with an ADU, you could have a triplex. So we talked about that for Rock Creek West. Ultimately, we did not offer that as a recommendation, but certainly that's something that the city can continue to explore.
Yeah, good morning. My name is David Luria. I'm the president of the Brandywine Tenants Association. During World War II, General Eisenhower said that the reason the U.S. Army won the war is because the U.S. Army had a suggestion box and the Germans didn't. They took suggestions from the troops down in the field. We in our tenant association, and the woman next to me is Karen Caston from the Sedgwick Gardens Tenant Association. We're the guys walking behind the tanks who are getting shot at. The suggestion box made by a lot of GIs in the Army was that they put a telephone on the back of the tank so that the guys could talk to the tank commander and direct the fire where it was coming from at the guys walking in back of the tank. What's been happening is that, and I guess I'd like to direct my remarks to the mayor's office. In the mayor's desire to do this housing initiative, which we support, and frankly, I've lived in my building for 26 years, and I'm delighted to see the diversity that this housing initiative has created, and very much in favor of creating low-income opportunities for low-income people and homeless people to have better homes. But part of the process has been that 98% of the people who've been put in the program are very well behaved and 2% are not. And the 2% are not are those who hold SWAT teams at bay in her apartment building, waiting, saying, I'm going to shoot anybody who comes through the door. And the SWAT team has to come and bail him out and find he doesn't have a gun. That same person then moves to our building and beats up a woman in his apartment and is now back in jail. There are people swearing in the hallways. There are mentally deranged people. There are drug addicts. There are people who need counseling. And so the mayor's office has to think through all the aspects of the program and carry out all the different aspects of security and safety and social counseling in accordance with the bill that's now in City Council to provide support for all the tenants, all the residents of all the buildings, including those who receive subsidies, so that we can all live in a nice, safe, and quiet environment.
I'm going to take that one because of my work. Social service support is an essential component of a plan such as this. In saying that, I agree 100%. I would only change your 98 to 99. Okay? 99% of the time, there's absolutely no problem. And then, well, ma'am, I've now placed 165 people in housing in the last 11 months. These are chronically homeless people. We have had one person we've had to remove from a unit. The issue is the social services support for the people who need it. Without that support, you are going to have those problems. Now,
housing in our building. You know, what social worker can help people who every day write F-U-C-K in the elevator?
those people need to be removed.
They are not being removed, and I would just add one other point about the pivot that. I'm sorry, I know this should be the way to get questions in, but the way DHS is distributing vouchers is out of control. There is almost nothing you can do and still not be given subsidized housing. They assess people, they tell people, we really recommend, you're not ready for independent housing, we recommend transitional housing, but it's up to you. We're going to give you a voucher regardless of what you get. People get independent housing that they are not ready for, that the city knows they are not ready for, and they are not being removed. They are not. There's a woman with severe mental health problems. She screams.
Okay. Ma'am,
She can be heard. She's so loud, she can be heard in the floor above her. She is not being removed. People are leaving the building from apartments around her because there are no controls on her.
without, as in a personal opinion only, without ULIs, this is an issue that we really need to take up with the city. I agree with you, but I'm not a city employee, okay? I understand the issue, and I understand there are solutions that need to be addressed, but that's not really a ULI panel issue. It's more of a local issue that is beyond our scope.
As long as the city does not get its act together in the way that it too is trying to increase affordable housing, the board will not accept the way this is happening.
Okay, I agree with that, but okay, next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyrone. I'm a PPA member. My question was, before the development of all of the apartments that's going on in the District of Columbia, was there a survey or a census taken for units that are still unoccupied with the developments that we already have in the city? And my second question was, due to the inflation of the economy now, a lot of the baby boomers that's in the housing projects that has run through their retirements, do you have some type of notation or plan for those that's still trying to hold on to their retirement and having to come out of retirement to do work for like 6-7 hours or 12 hours a week just to stay afloat in this type of economy?
So comments to both of those questions. First one, we're very aware of overall vacancy based on surveys that are done professionally in the industry. I can't speak anecdotally to an individual building or neighborhoods. That is considered in our conversations. There's a certain amount of vacancy that always exists purely naturally from turnover of units. There's certain buildings that probably need to be renovated and maintained. goes down a different path, which is a conversation either about, laws around maintaining the building or responsiveness of code violations, things like that, but we can't get into that. With respect to the income side of the conversation, again, probably to narrow that, make sure this conversation is really clear. This panel was charged with a discussion around affordable housing between 30% and 80% of median income. Most of the issues that you might discuss about a particular building in a particular area of town, they might be lower than that, they might be higher than that. There's plenty of conversations. We were also not charged with transportation. As was discussed in the presentation, lots of issues exist. There's plenty of room for more conversations around very low income, and there's plenty of conversations around different zoning styles. We could only point out a couple of different things. The final report will make reference to vacancy in the city. Frankly, the final report will have reference to wraparound services. We just felt that for our population focus, which was in the 30 to 80% of median income, we couldn't tackle everything.
What about for the property that's wrapped up in litigation?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What about the property that is wrapped up in litigation in low-income areas that could be used for housing?
It's a valid point. Again, last part of a response would be that we were charged with discussing Rock Creek West, specifically, not the city overall. But I agree with you. I think there's plenty of opportunities for housing. You get into a conversation around single-family housing in Rock Creek West. That is a 5-bedroom house that was originally occupied by a family, and everybody has left the house except for one remaining parent. How do you can't legislate that. That's a personal choice, but providing ADUs is one way around it. But I don't disagree with your question, but it's not really for us to respond.
Any suggestions on how to get land use out of litigation to be able to use the land for a particular low income or public awareness?
We did address the litigation issue at the beginning of the presentation. We talked about the need for the city to adopt some new policies and practices when it comes to litigation, and be happy to look at those again with you and talk a little bit more in detail about that. I wanted to also just mention that I think the other conversation we had in some depth, and you will see this fleshed out in the final report, is a discussion around really this whole issue of the interconnectedness of issues related to housing and transportation. I know he left, and childcare and employment. So seeing this as more of a systems issue, and this really gets to the conversation that Phil was just having about wraparound services, continuum of care, which are important issues in housing, but also in the broader community. So happy to chat a little bit more. Do we want to try and get one more question in?
One final comment. Part of what I hear you saying is that there's a lot of housing that for one reason or another is being underutilized, and why can't that housing be utilized? Is that part of what? Oh.
Workforce development, life and loan, that have the credentials to be able to go in and refurbish these houses.
Okay, so what I want to say is thank you. That, identifying these properties that are underutilized and then figuring out how strategies, and it might be on a one-by-one basis, which means that it's going to be an intensive process, but identifying them and figuring out then how to bring them online, that's something, and I don't want to speak for the panel, but I think that that's something that that would fall easily within the idea that we had of what can we do to increase the denominator, what can we do to increase the total amount of housing that's available, because that ends up addressing the problem for everybody.
Yeah, hi. My name's Caitlin. I have a couple questions, so if we don't have time to answer all of them, that's fine, but I'll try to make them quick. One was around municipally owned housing. So it seems like a lot of the suggestions have been rooted in either public-private partnerships or private development models, and I'm wondering if there's been any discussion around municipally owned housing, especially since, as I'm sure it came up in discussions and interviews currently they're planning to knock out a bunch of the public housing that we have. And so there's been new models around social housing and other forms of municipally owned housing that may be useful in this discussion. A second question that I have is around the legal defense fund and the changes that I think Heather was talking about, specifically about limiting standing to reduce litigation against uses for land use. One of the questions I have related to the methodology that you all have used, I know you focused on Rock Creek West. When coming up with these recommendations, was it in the full context? Like, did you study a lot of the litigation, or was it just based on things that you have heard or things that you've seen specific to this neighborhood? And I say that because there's been a lot of other cases that have been brought by communities to prevent development that's happening that is not equitable. And when I heard the legal defense fund, that inherently sounds like a good thing. However, I'm just concerned with the way that it would be used in the way that it was presented here. So that was another question. And the third thing, really briefly, was related to your presentation as well around the education and the marketing piece. I think when it comes to the studying the history of housing policies and the way that they have been used to push out specific communities, you're right, a lot of people aren't aware of that. But another thing that we've seen a lot in our work in doing community work is that even when there are opportunities for community engagement, for education, to get feedback from communities that have been most impacted, it's not always used. It's not incorporated into the plans that are being created. It is more of a marketing. Let's figure out how to get people on board. Let's figure out how to get the political will to push the agenda that we have created. So was there discussion around recommendations to city officials as to how to actually take feedback from communities that they're getting, so that we don't keep running into the same bulldozing issue, even if the city thinks that what they're doing is to create better communities for everyone?
I'll start. Public housing is a really important part of your affordable housing typology here in Washington, D.C. We were not asked to look at 30% and below of AMI, which is typically that public housing product, but we did, as a panel, discuss the need for the city to pay attention to that housing product and to ensure that going forward, that was addressed more fully through city policy. There'll be a little bit more discussion about that, but our charge was 30 to 80% of AMI in Rock Creek West. In terms of litigation, I don't particularly like the word marketing. What we're really talking about, let me shift here. What we're really talking about when we say communications is a communication strategy, but it's also incumbent on the city, I think, to take that feedback and utilize that in policy making. And so when you do effective policy making around racial equity, you are applying that racial equity lens to your policy making generally, not just selectively. And I think that's an important issue and one that advocacy groups need to hold the city accountable for. And I'm pretty sure they're prepared for that. And the third thing I would just say about litigation and the legal defense fund, we did have a conversation about that. This is really an effort to enable advocacy organizations to kind of rebalance that litigation picture. We did not look in depth at all of the litigation material for Rock Creek West. We know anecdotally, talking to our colleagues at the city, that litigation has become a major impediment to development, and that it is slowing and sometimes blocking development, and especially challenging affordable housing development. So that was why our recommendation was rooted in those three items.
But frankly, given how we defined the parties that would be able to bring litigation, your community would be considered a vested party. So that wasn't meant to eliminate that kind of a party, or that kind of a litigant. What we are focused on is when somebody from, Ward 8 brings a lawsuit against a property trying to be built in Ward 3 because they don't think it's enough density, or alternatively, somebody from an adjacent community brings something simply to try and bring it to the press and put it out into the world, but there's no really good reason to shut it down. So that was our focus, was really around people bringing lawsuits that have no status and standing.
I'd like to also respond to a couple of your questions. We did, to be clear, we did look very closely at publicly subsidized 100% affordable housing and what it would take to make that possible. And some of our recommendations around co-location at public facilities like libraries or schools, et cetera, where there's underutilized land, deals with that because the land cost is so high here. It makes it difficult to do that type of housing. Also looking for district-owned parcels that could be leased to 100% affordable nonprofit developers or the purchase of parcels for that purpose. And then I also wanted to touch on the community engagement process. I think, I don't work here and I don't know, but I think, exactly what it's like, but I hear your concerns about people feeling as though they're not heard. And I think that I personally, and I assume the panel as well, believe that community engagement can be a really productive process if it's done right, and that there's, I think I've seen in my work a huge improvement in the way that community engagement is done. There's all these great consultants now that are really good at it, and I want to emphasize how important I think it is, because when people feel like they're not heard, then the people that are actually want to contribute and add value to and create better development don't show up to the meetings, and it's just the folks that oppose it that do. And so making that process fun and engaging and making it a true dialogue is really important.
I don't know if this is being live streamed too. So it's a distinction between feeling like not being heard and actually being heard. And then on the litigation side, I know you guys will be putting out a full report. This is just a summary. So I just encourage thinking about, again, we talk about externalities, but those extend beyond. And a lot of you come from a planning background. It sounds like you can't just look at it in the context of Rock Creek West. The decisions that are going to be made for Rock Creek West will impact the people in all of the other parts of the city as well. And I don't want to prevent them from being able to push for equitable development in their own communities just because we're trying to get more housing in this one specific area.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time. What we want to do is I'm going to give you an email address that further questions can be directed to, and they will be distributed to members of the panel for answer, and we'll get back to you. It is Paul, P-A-U-L, A-N-G-E-L-O-N-E. Again, A-N-G-E-L-O-N-E @uli.org. Okay, so, I think this question and answer period proved that there were no shortage of opinions and no lack of insistence that those opinions be heard. And as chairman, I can tell you at times it felt a lot like herding a group of angry cats, but I am proud of the work they did. I also think I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, while the issues you face in this city are not unique, I would say that you have been surprisingly, shockingly in some ways, fortunate to have a city that is actively engaged in talking about this community, about this issue and trying to work on it. We have found the staff to be informed, helpful, open to discussion, acknowledging certain weaknesses and not in any way be defensive. And that is a really refreshing thing for us, because I can tell you I've been to cities on this very topic where we did not have that discussion and we're not even really welcome. So I want to thank the city for their efforts and their time on this. We want to thank all of you. We want to thank you for your interest. We want to thank you for being here. I do have to push a button. Oh, that slide is not there. Okay. This presentation has already been downloaded to ULI's uli.org website. The final presentation, which has to go through a professional writing review, a fact-checking review, making sure areas are expanded and making sure what we've really done is more informative, will be released in early September. You should expect it right around then. We are having a big meeting here in September, and we want to make sure this report is available prior to that meeting so it can be discussed, its findings and recommendations can be discussed at that meeting. This is not the end of this, by the way. This discussion will be reviewed and talked about for a long time at ULI about whether our recommendations were correct or not correct or could have been modified. This panel is truly reflective of our membership, because instead of having 7 opinionated, forceful people, we have 45,000 opinionated, forceful people. So it will be talked about for a long time. So thank you very much.